it's so important that legal wants you to include it with the offer, but I've given up that fight. All right, you're not coming up. Hold on. There you go. The statewide buyer and seller advisor. We all know this. Sorry, I'm admitting people as I'm doing this. Hold on. Okay, so we all know this. It's like, how many pages is it now? It's 14 pages. And it used to be 10, and you used to have to get every single page initialed, which was a pain. And look at the table of contents. So this is why this is important, because it gives disclosures about, and this is why legal wants you to do it with the offer, is that disclosures regarding accessory dwelling units, about arbitration, building permits, all of this is included in this one document. And it puts everybody on notice. So, you know, it's talking about neighborhood noise, it's talking about PACE loans, pets. It has so many things in this document that's why it's so important. We're talking about the statewide buyer and seller advisory. So it's 14 pages. It talks about investigations. We're not going to go through the whole thing. It's 14 pages, but your buyer and your seller should be looking at this, because it talks about if you have a specific reason why you want to buy this property, say you want to use it as an Airbnb, that it puts everybody on notice that they have to check with their local, you know, county or city or whatever to make sure that they can do what they want to do with it. You know, it talks about so much. And that's why it's one of the most important things: soil, square footage, water intrusion, wells. Talks about fire hardening. We'll get to fire hardening separately. But, you know, there is so much on this document that it makes it one of the most important disclosures that you're going to give your buyer and seller. And because of that, that's why, like I said, legal wants you to include it with the offer. Somebody in a restaurant.
Yeah, it's Alon. It's Alon's mic is on.
Yeah, can you mute, please? Great. So that's this talks about retrofitting, short-term rentals, like I said, pools, water shortages, and all that. It's a really, really, really important document, and you should take a look at it, familiarize yourself with it, because you know, going over it will take the whole hour. But you know, it's just letting everybody know about. That's why it's called the statewide buyer and seller advisory, because it's talking about every possible thing that can affect somebody. So go ahead.
You're saying that at the time that we write the offer,
legal wants you to include it with the offer. I've seen some agents do it. Is it a good practice? Absolutely, because you're putting it becomes a part of the offer, and you're putting everybody on notice that this is what's, you know, about ADUs, about use of the property, you know.
Rich, my question was that if somebody does it 2-3 days after, you're saying that don't do that. Do it at the time of.
Well, I'm saying it's preferred to do it at the time of the offer, but you know, nobody does that. Everybody does it. Yeah, with
so much is overwhelming for the buyer. But
I get it, and that's why so many people don't do it. But you know, the time to inform the buyer
who in Culver
in
City?
their investigations is.
I was just talking to someone there too. It was very nice.
Okay, can you mute?
Oh, really? Boris?
Michelle, is it you, Michelle? Okay, okay. So that's the buyer and seller advisory statewide.
Rich, one more question.
Sure.
Is that across the board for residential, condos, land, etc.?
Residential condo, yes. Yeah. It's across the board.
Thank
you. Up to 4 units, correct?
Well, residential, yes. Land, yeah, you know. It's not required on multi-units, it's just required on residential.
But what I mean is after 5 or more is not required, up to 4 units.
Correct, it is. Absolutely, it is. Okay, any more questions about statewide? Okay. I'm gonna go through like lesser, well, not lesser. Lead-based paint. Very important. It's required statutorily if the property is older than 19, what? Anybody know? In here? 78, right. If the property is 78 or older, this document is required, and it needs to be filled out by the seller about the seller's disclosure if they have knowledge of lead-based paint or that's in the property, or if they have any reports pertaining to lead-based paint, that all needs to be disclosed by the seller. The seller signs it, the listing agent signs it, and and then the broker representing the agent representing the seller signs, and then the buyer signs acknowledging that they received it, and then the buyer's agent. So so that's the lead-based paint disclosure, statutorily required. Statutorily required means it's required by law. So we don't say, nah, we're not going to do it if it's pre-1978. Okay. Something that's also required, and it's not in these, but you all should know where it is. You go to ePubs. Where are we? No, I'm wrong area. ePubs. The earthquake hazards report. Now, if it's the building is 1960, 60 or earlier, this is required. And it's required to be filled out by the seller. Is the water heater braced? this is not like the SPQ or the TDS where it says there's only a yes or no answer. It says doesn't apply, it could not apply, or they don't know. They give them the option of don't know. So, the house is bolted to the foundation, cripple walls, all of this. You know, this needs to be filled out for 1960. Oh, you're not following me. Come on. Okay. For 1960, no, you're not. Okay. I'll give up on it. 1960 or earlier. And then it's signed by the seller and then signed by the buyer. Okay, and then also in EPUBs, is the signature page for the earthquake booklet or the environmental hazards and earthquake safety booklets. So let's go back to that. Wait, hold on. Because you. Sorry. If you go back to that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 through 4 are these guides. So you can send them directly from your forms library. You can email them to your clients. So you have a client who says, well, I'm not going to sign because I didn't get anything. It's easy to give it. We used to have to make copies of it and, you know, produce a hard copy, but now you can send them directly from your zip forms. So that's nice. So this, remember, this is in EPUBs. I don't know why they separate it. It doesn't really make sense, but that's what they're doing. And so EPUBs is where these it's where the booklets are. It's where the earthquake hazard report for 1960 and less, and where the receipt of the booklets are, the signature pages.
And this is for both buyer and seller.
Yes. Okay. We have a Sherry. If it's a seller who is a non-occupant owner who has been an owner but never lived in the property, how much of this needs to be completed by them? All of it. If you're not, unless you are exempt, which means you're a surviving trustee from a trust, or it's a probate, or it's a bank owned, the seller has to fill out this paperwork to the best of their knowledge. Because if they've owned it, even though they haven't lived in it, they have knowledge of the property. They know if they use it as a rental for 20 years, they know that the tenant complained about the water heater 5 months ago and it was replaced, or that the roof had a leak, or that the toilet had a leak. They know this, so they need to fill this out. You know, not about the earthquake, but on your TDS and SPQ. So, let's see what else I wanted to cover before I went to the meat of this. Okay. Water conserving plumbing fixtures and carbon monoxide. So we used to have a form, the WHSD, the water heater smoke detector, and then we have a separate form for the carbon monoxide detector. So this covers both of them because the water heater and the smoke detectors are covered in the TDS. But this covers the carbon monoxide and water conserving plumbing fixtures. This is required that on purchase, on transaction of a purchase. And it's just, it talks about water conserving plumbing and carbon monoxide and all of that, compliance and whatnot. So, and these are all disclosures. It's like, I get a lot of calls, well, we're representing the buyer and the seller doesn't want to sign this. Like, they're disclosures, they're not, how do I want to put it? They're not attesting to anything. They are accepting the lead base, but what they're doing is they're acknowledging receipt of a disclosure. That's all they're doing. So it's they're not going to be financially bound by something. It's just a disclosure. If they don't, but you can't force somebody to sign something they don't want to sign. So as long as you get something, an email saying my client won't sign this, but our client has to sign it. And if we're representing somebody, our client needs to sign it. So, sorry. So, so that's what this is covering. So, let's see that question. What about smoke detectors? Smoke detectors are handled in the TDS. Sorry. So that's, what is this one called? Called water conserving plumbing fixtures and carbon monoxide detector codes. This isn't, I don't make this mandatory, but you all should be using this form. Market, especially in this changing market. Market conditions advisor. It puts everybody on notice, basically that we don't have a crystal ball, that talks about offering price. It talks about non-contingent offers. And once again, if you're representing a buyer and putting in a non-contingent offer, there's an additional addendum that I require as the broker of the offices, that it's a non-contingent offer addendum. You check with your MCA or agent services as to where it is within your office, because every office has it someplace else. But it talks about loan contingencies and appraisal contingencies. It talks about multiple offers, seller's considerations. Talks about all of that. You guys should be using this for every deal, every transaction. I don't make, like I said, I don't make it mandatory, but you should be using this form. So it's the market condition advisory. Okay, now let's go. TDS. This, once again, is statutorily required. It's required by statute when you're transferring a 1 to 5 unit residential unit, as long as they are not exempt, which means they're a surviving trustee, they are probate or a bank owned. Those are exempt from the TDS. And if you're exempt from the TDS, you're also exempt from the SPQ. But for those in the example, in Sherry's example, they've owned it for years and years and years. They just never lived in it. That's not an excuse not to put this to submit this form. This is required. It's required to submit this form.
Which can ask you.
Sure.
Would bankruptcy also apply?
Bankruptcy also, yes. Court, bankruptcy.
You have to do it, or?
No, it's exempt. It's exempt from a bankruptcy. So fill out the date. That's important. Obviously the address and everything, but fill out the date. Now everybody gets caught up on this very first section, substituted disclosures, inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract of the sale or receipt of deposit. So this is not where you attach any inspection reports that you have from previous buyers or anything like that. That's not what this is referring to. It's referring to a specific inspection report that is to handle the questions on this questionnaire. And I can tell you, I've never in my career seen an inspection report like that. So you're never going to put inspection reports completed pursuant to contract of sale. You're never going to put additional inspection reports or disclosures, because this is not where you're going to put any additional inspection reports. You use receipt of reports in order to do that. You're going to say no substituted disclosures. That is the answer to the first question. TDS is not required for 5 units. It's residential, 4 units. 1 to 4. Okay, so that's the first section. You're going to do no substituted disclosures. Seller is or is not occupying. People forget that. And then you check out, have this. And once again, you as the seller's agent do not fill this out. You can help them in some ways, but you can't fill it out for them. It has to be filled out by the seller. So all the things, now, when I say you can't fill it out for them, but if it has an oven or a range and they forgot to check it, you can say, hey, Mr. Seller, you forgot to check, something, the oven or the range. I mean, you can do that, but you can't physically go down and check off the boxes for them. Roof type, age. So an approximation of the age. A lot of people aren't going to know how old their roof is. But I've lived in it. I've owned the house for 10 years and it was 10 years old when I bought it. There's your approximate age of the roof, 20 years. So people can figure this out. I mean, nobody's binding anybody to this information, except it's really important to disclose on the next page. Are you aware of significant defects, malfunctions in any of the following? If they know of something that's wrong, they need to disclose it. It's called disclose, disclose, disclose. because you want to stay out of court. Because that's where you will end up, most likely, if you don't disclose it. So make sure that they are aware that disclosure is their friend. They really need to disclose everything that they know about the property. Now, in the case of somebody who's never lived in it, like I said, they're aware of certain things within the property. I mean, you don't rent out a property for 20 years and not know anything about a property. That's not possible. So make sure that those people, you know, are disclosing what they know about the property. Let's see. What is considered significant? Alon, I don't know what you mean by what is considered significant. You want to unmute and ask the question? No?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, Rich. I was just wondering, it says here, are you, the seller, aware of any significant defects in any of the following? So I'm wondering, what is considered significant defect?
Well, if you have to think about it, I mean, it's a significant defect. I mean, there has to be some common sense. So if an exterior wall is leaning, I would consider that a significant defect. I'm sure a buyer would consider that a significant defect. If a door doesn't open properly, I would consider that a significant defect. You know, there is common sense here. So that's all I would say. Because the penalty for not disclosing something because you thought I didn't think that was really significant. I didn't really think that the floor sloping was significant.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. So definitely it's not open. It's not open for interpretation. So just disclose. That's all.
Just disclose, right?
Yep. Disclose.
Because when it becomes more significant later on, when the buyer discovers that the foundation has been settling for 20 years, you're going to pay for that. I didn't think it was really that significant. So, common sense.
Rich, I have a quick question.
Sure.
On the no substituted disclosures for this transfer, you said that's usually what they would be putting. It's only an inspection that would be done just for specifically this RV.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
And it is taking the place of them filling out this.
Okay.
That's a substituted report. So if they're having an inspection done specifically for this document, it's taking the place, it's in substitution of this.
Got it. So it's like if in the case where the buyer requested a report from the seller? No.
Well, but the seller, why would the seller even be doing a report prior to the sale of the property? I know that they're, you know, in Northern California, they're hot on pre-inspections prior, but here in Southern California, we don't really follow that. So I'm you know, I would never look, I would never advise somebody to do an inspection to take the place of this document. If they want to do pre-inspections, then they can do pre-inspections. And Michael, I think the pre-inspection you're talking about in Compton is the city pre-inspection.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's nothing to do with this.
Understood. Thank you.
Its own thing. That they require pre-inspection, and the city of Bell also requires a pre-inspection. Pasadena used to. I think they've moved away somewhat from that. I'm not sure, but you know, the inspection, pre-inspection reports done by the seller in order to take the place of this TDS is really rare, really rare. I've never seen it.
Defines the whole logic.
Well,
Why would,
right.
why would
And this is why I don't suggest pre-inspections. Number one, if you're representing the buyer, why are you not going to accept a report done by the seller and the seller's inspector without doing a report of your own? I wouldn't do that. But the seller can use it as, you know, if they come up with, you know, if they show that there really is a significant defect in, you know, like leaks show up, like toilet leaks or sink leaks, stuff like that, they can be proactive and hire a plumber for a day and just have them, you know, fix those leaks and say, okay, here's my inspection that I did on this date, and here are the repairs to the leaks. But I still, as a buyer's agent, I would recommend that they do their own inspection. So.
Hey, Rich, we have a couple more questions. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so mine is personally, I just had, I'm in a transaction and I represent the buyer. The seller filled this out and very obviously was incorrect on some things, like, you know, sprinklers and driveway and just some different things that were there, and forgot and left a whole bunch of places blank. So I have a good relationship with the listing agent, so I just kind of pointed it out and said, hey, we need these things, you know, the wire, all these different things that were not filled out. So they handled it very well and they gave it back to us. What would be the proper way actually to do that?
Well, here's a couple of things. If they've answered some things that are, you know, something about sprinklers and what, I mean, you could gently say, oh, when we were there, you know, the sprinklers weren't working, or whatever the problem with the sprinkler was, you can, you know, mention that. Leaving blanks is something entirely different. You leave a blank on a TDS, remember, this is required by law. You leave a blank on the TDS is not complete. It's just not done. So if they want to leave blanks, they can leave blanks all they want, but they really shouldn't be. I mean, if they're arguing with you, it's like, it's not complete. This document is not complete. So guess what? After, this allows the buyer, after removing contingencies, to rescind their offer and get out of the deal, because this is required by law and it wasn't done properly. So there should be zero blanks.
Wow. So
and
even
if there's a yes, there needs to be an answer to that yes.
Thank you.
An explanation.
One last question, Rich, on this. So a seller can have inspection, they're just not going to mark substituting for the transfer.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yes. Like, as I said, what happened here? As I said in the beginning, you're not going to use this to deliver inspections. You're going to use the receipt of reports to deliver any inspections. Because there's extra language on the receipt of reports that says to Mr. Buyer, this is, here are some reports, but you shouldn't be relying on them totally. You should be doing your own investigation. So we need that extra language to say, you're advised to do your own investigations. If you decide to use these reports, and there are buyers out there who said, well, I don't want to pay $300 or $400 for another report. I'm going to, you know, this is fine with me. That's fine, but, you know, we've advised you not to do that. And that's the language you need. Yes. Michael, yes, even though all contingencies are because this is required by law. And if you did not supply this per the law, a buyer can rescind.
Within 3 days, right?
5. So, so then we get to the question part of this, and talks about room additions. It talks about flooding, major damage, CCNRs, CCNR deed restrictions. The answer is yes. Then just say there is a HOA. You know, a lot of people leave it blank. I like, there's a yes answer. There needs to be an explanation, even though it is so obvious. Just, you know, just answer it. It, you know, doesn't take much time. And then, then down here in D, this is where it talks about smoke detectors and bracing and whatnot. So that takes the place of the WHSD, the water heater and smoke detector. Now there are still some offices who will throw that in, and you know, it's not required because it is handled in the TDS. Well, my office requires it, and depends on how nice you want to be, whether you'll have your seller sign it or whoever it is, or buyer sign it. But it really isn't required because it's handled here. Okay, so now we get to another important part of this document, and the first section is for the broker representing the seller. So the other thing that's statutorily required by an agent, and it's because there was a really big lawsuit, I think, against Coldwell Banker years ago, is that the agent didn't do an adequate, the agent should have been aware of something about the property, but didn't disclose it because it was so obvious. And why was it so obvious? Well, by looking at the property, you should have seen it. So that's why statutorily an agent is required to do a visual inspection of a property. This is statutorily required. Now this office, all of my offices, are required to do that visual inspection through the AVID, the AVID. So you all have to do an AVID because you have to do that visual inspection. So you're all going to check if this is your listing, see attached AVID. I just had a question from one of my offices. I've never visited the property. It's in Central California. You know, so I'm sure there's a waiver for the AVID. Guess what? There's not a waiver for the AVID. Okay. I understand we can sell property anywhere in the state of California because we have the California license. And I applaud anybody who gets a property, who gets a listing outside of this area. But somehow you have to service that listing. So there must be somebody on that end that is helping you with this. So here's what you do, and this is what I suggested. You can either have somebody there FaceTiming you. You can do your visual inspection. through FaceTime or Zoom or whatever it is, as long as you're doing that, and on your Avid, you say, agent did this visual inspection through Zoom or whatever it means. Just say that you did it and how you did it. Because remember, during COVID, there was a lot of things that we couldn't go to properties and we couldn't do this, but we still have to do that Avid. We still have to attach an addendum and say, this is how we did it. So that's one way. Excuse me. Or if you have an agent helping you on that end, that agent can do the Avid. Because there's a place, well, we don't have the Avid up. We'll by looking at the clock, we'll do the Avid next class, because that's my favorite document. There's a place of who did this inspection. So it doesn't have to be the listing agent. The listing agent's assistant can do it, or somebody you're working with in this outside area. So, but it still has to be done. So in the case of the listing agent or the broker representing the seller, you're going to check that box, agent visual inspection disclosure. So I know all of us really wait until the last minute to do that. Oh, it's the final walkthrough, I'll do it then, or whatever. But guess what? Just like if there's blanks on this document, which is required by the law, if you don't attach this Avid, the listing agent, it's not done. So if you don't do your Avid until the final walkthrough, the buyer has already removed all their contingencies, they get your Avid, there's something on your Avid they don't like, guess what can happen? They can rescind the sale, because this document wasn't complete until you attach that Avid. So do your Avids up front. You're on a listing appointment, do your Avid then. You're on a showing, do your Avid then. Don't wait until the last minute. Send it with the disclosures. You've got 7 days to send disclosures. Make sure that that's attached at the time the TDS is sent. So now this doesn't apply to the buyer's agent, because everybody thought, the smart attorneys at CAR thought, well, the buyer's agent is going to hold up the deal by holding back their Avid until the last minute. So that's why it doesn't matter when the buyer's agent submits an Avid. But if you're one of my agents, still do it really early. So, so that's basically the TDS, and everybody's signing as they've received it and all of that. So that is the TDS. And then, as I call it, the TDS on steroids, the SPQ. This is required contractually, because it's in the contract, that if you're not exempt for the TDS, that contractually you are saying you're going to fill this out. So, so you are contractually obligated, or the seller is contractually obligated to submit this. And we talk, we talk about the statutory questions, and within the last 3 years, a death, on the property. And here, note to seller, the manner of death may be material fact to the buyer and should be disclosed, except for death by HIV/AIDS. So a bunch of us were just having it actually, I don't remember where we are, but a couple of brokers having a conversation about this. It was at the SRAR board meeting while we were having lunch. So we're talking about death. Okay, so talking about, well, how graphic do you need to get? Well, because, there's suicide, there's murder, there's those things. So I wouldn't be, you don't have to get graphic, but it is a material fact. So if there was a death on the property in the last 3 years by a murder, that's what you say. There was a murder within the last 3 years, or there was a suicide in the last 3 years. That's all you need to say. You don't have to say what manner, how people were killed, how they killed themselves. The fact that you're disclosing it is sufficient. So, and it's only the last 3 years. So, but I will say if it's a notorious thing, like if it was a famous thing, I don't know that it's not still a material fact. Like, I mean, the house isn't there anymore, but the Sharon Tate murders by the Mansons, I mean, that's infamous. And, I would say that it was a material fact. But years ago, somebody bought that and tore the house down. So, and even changed the address.
Which,
Yes.
if 4 years ago, there was a murder in the house. Four. And the buyer says, I heard from the neighbor there was something going on.
It's not required because it says 3 years. So that's the statutory. Then we get into repairs and alterations. What did they do? Did they do them with permits? There's a question about insurance claims. It used to be that you could get a report called I believe it was called the Clue report from insurance companies. But consumers can't get that anymore, I don't think. But you never know who has friends in insurance who can run this stuff. So if there were insurance, if there was insurance claims, then I would disclose it. Okay, there was a couple of questions. Sorry, I missed them.
Good question. So I have a house and past tenant had a fire in one of the rooms. That's additional repairs. So when I sell that, it's good. No?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially with the fire, because you don't know how that was repaired. And a lot of times that smell, it's hard to get rid of that smell. I may have one where the property is being sold with the occupants that are uncooperative and they may not let you in.
Yeah, that's concerning the Avid earlier that you were speaking about.
Oh yeah, concerning the Avid. Well, okay. So
can you just kind of only do the outside and maybe on the Avid indicate?
You can do the outside, and you can. Were there ever photos taken of the inside for the listing?
No. No. Right. As I said, like the occupants the home may be sold with the occupants intact because whoever buys it may have to deal with foreclosure. So
then I would say that do the outside because you can walk the outside. You can say the inside wasn't inspected due to uncooperative tenants. Properties being sold with tenants in place.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just do that. Yeah. And then there was one about, does the person doing the audit out of the area have to be licensed? Well, an assistant doesn't have to be licensed. So then the answer, I guess my answer would be no. It would be preferable that a licensed individual do it, because it just would be, I think. So yeah. All right, so then we talk about repairs, we talk about structural systems and appliances, disaster relief insurance and civil, civil settlement. I just have something now that after the close of escrow, suddenly somebody popped up with a $400,000 lien on a place, saying that she was owed a private loan, or there was a settlement or something that didn't show up on the title prior, and they want their money. So I shifted it over to the title company, saying, you guys deal with it. They bought title insurance. So I don't know where that's gone yet, but I'm sure it'll come back to me. Deal with it. Oops, sorry. What was that? Title, ownership, legal claims. There you go. Neighbors, neighborhood is very important. Neighbors and neighborhood. They are, you can have good neighbors and you can have bad neighbors. Somebody needs to mute. Good neighbors or bad neighbors. I had talked an agent who had a client, a listing, the neighbor across the street, for some reason, is the neighbor from hell and would shine 500-watt lights at their house. That's a problem. And you're going to have a hard time selling that house, I think. But you've got to disclose this, because anything has to be disclosed. What other things? That's about it that I need to point out. They added about smoking and vaping. Because you know what, marijuana, it gets into the walls and stuff. So if it was a grow house or something, that needs to be disclosed. I tell this story all the time. My agent was the listing agent, did the final walkthrough on the day it closed, the day it recorded. They went to the property, everybody was happy and everything was nice until Gladys Kravitz walks up and says, did you know that this was a grow house? And it was raided a lot of times, and the buyer didn't know, my listing agent didn't know, the seller kept it from everybody. And there's an example where the buyer said, I don't want this house. Wasn't disclosed. I want out. He rescinded the sale. And luckily, we were able to get out of, everybody got out of the sale. The buyer got their money back. They paid some escrow fees, the seller paid escrow fees, everybody went on their way. That could have been a nightmare, because I was being told by legal, lawyer up, don't tell everybody to get a lawyer, don't do anything. But I had an escrow officer who said, I think we could do this. I think we can get out of this. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you a few days. Let me know. And she was able to do it. So anyways, so that's the SBQ. I'm going to stop here because we're at 5. So we will do next week, I have another class. We'll finish up some disclosures, doing my most favorite, the Avid, and we'll probably tackle the fire hardening, everybody's favorite. Stop sharing. Anybody? Where'd my thing go? Oh, we have some questions. How do you send the edible SBQ and TDS to the seller via zip forms? When you send it to them, it goes, they can check on it, but use Glide, even though it's owned by, I think it's owned by Compass. It's a good system. Question 18 is pretty broad and saying smoking and vaping. Well, yeah, it is pretty broad.
From Calabasas.
What?
Thank you, Rick.
Sherry, it is broad, but you know, it's just putting everybody on notice that this has been happening. I mean, people don't like people smoking in their house. So, you know, that covers this. So, okay. So anybody have any other questions? Oh, I didn't stop sharing. Where is that? There we go. Anybody have any other questions before I close it out?
It's one of those things.